Today, we're going to talk about how one single plant, cotton, didn't just build an empire in the American South, it literally reshaped the entire global economy.
Okay, let's just start with a number that is, well, it's pretty hard to wrap your head around. In 1793, the United States produced about 3,000 bales of cotton. A tiny amount. But by 1860, that number had exploded to 4 million bales. That is a 1,300 times increase. It was the fastest, most explosive expansion of any commodity in the history of the world.
You know, there's a story we all kind of learn in school, that before the Civil War, the North and the South were like two different countries with two totally separate economies. Well, that story, it's a lie. The truth is they were completely tangled up with each other, financially, morally, the whole shebang. They were locked into one single economic system, and it was all built on cotton.
So let's really get into the shocking reality of King Cotton. Before the war, its power was absolute. It was generating wealth on a scale the world had just never seen. And all that wealth was concentrated right there in the American South, making it, per person, the richest place on the entire planet.
And this incredible wealth wasn't just sitting in the South. No. You have to picture it like the central gear in this giant global machine of 19th century capitalism. Cotton, picked by enslaved people on a plantation in Alabama, was fueling the Industrial Revolution in factories in Manchester, England, and the whole operation was being financed by the biggest banks in New York City. The entire world economy ran on this stuff. So, the big question is, how did this all happen so unbelievably fast? Well, it really all boils down to one single piece of technology, an invention that came with a bitter, world-changing irony.
You see, the biggest bottleneck with cotton was separating the fiber from these really sticky seeds. It was a nightmare. Working all day, by hand, a person might be able to clean 1 single pound of cotton. But then, in 1793, Eli Whitney's cotton gin comes along and just blows the doors off. Suddenly, one person could process over 50 pounds a day. It made cotton profitable on a whole new scale.
And this is where the story takes a really dark and tragic turn. The deep irony is that Eli Whitney actually thought his invention would reduce the need for enslaved labor. He thought he was helping, but it did the exact opposite. It made slavery more profitable than it had ever been, which kicked off this massive, forced migration known as the Second Middle Passage, where 1 million enslaved people were torn from their families and moved to the Deep South. The enslaved population just exploded. So this became more than just farming. It was a global slavery machine. And to really understand its power, you have to look at the cold, hard numbers, the brutal economics that literally turned human beings into financial assets.
By 1860, cotton wasn't just an American export. It was pretty much the American export. I mean, look at this. It made up a massive 60% of all the goods the United States was selling to the rest of the world.
And what was the engine behind that export machine? People. In 1860, the total financial value, the price tag, placed on the 4 million enslaved people in the South was between $3 and $4 billion. And to really let that sink in, just look at this comparison. The total value of enslaved human beings was greater than all of the nation's factories, all of its railroads, and all of its banks combined. Let that sit for a second. The single most valuable financial asset in America wasn't land or industry, it was people. And this right here is how we just completely shatter that myth of two separate economies. Northern money was the rocket fuel for Southern slavery. You had New York banks handing out massive loans to plantation owners, and the collateral for those loans? Human beings. You had factories in Massachusetts getting rich spinning all that Southern cotton. In fact, the economy of New York City was so tied to the system that its own mayor suggested the city should secede from the Union with the South just to protect the cotton money. So it's no surprise that when the Civil War finally broke out, the Confederacy was convinced it was holding an unbeatable trump card. They decided to make a massive, high-stakes gamble, betting their entire future on the world's addiction to their cotton.
Their grand strategy was called cotton diplomacy. And the plan was brutally simple: cut everybody off. They would halt all cotton exports, creating an economic crisis that they believed would force industrial powers like Great Britain and France to intervene in the war on their side.
And they were supremely confident this would work. I mean, just listen to what Senator James Henry Hammond had said just a few years earlier. They truly believed their economic power made them invincible. Cotton is king.
And here's the crazy thing. They were almost right. The embargo worked. It created what was called the cotton famine in Britain.
leading to mass unemployment and a deep recession. The British government was seriously debating intervention. But then Lincoln made his move. The Emancipation Proclamation masterfully reframed the entire war. It was no longer just about preserving the Union, it was now a fight against slavery. And for an anti-slavery nation like Britain, siding with the Confederacy suddenly became politically impossible. That, combined with some key Union victories, meant the gamble had failed.
Okay, so King Cotton fell. But here's the crucial takeaway. The arguments, the economic excuses used to defend that brutal system, they didn't just disappear. They just found new issues to attach themselves to.
Just listen to the echoes here. The argument that ending slavery would completely destroy the economy is the exact same logic we hear today to resist taking action on climate change. It's the same argument against creating ethical supply chains or raising the minimum wage. The playbook is identical. We'd love to do the right thing, but the cost of change is just too high for the economy to handle. And this isn't just a historical parallel. The exploitation tied to cotton is still very much with us. We're talking about documented forced labor of the Uyghur people in Xinjiang, China. We're talking about catastrophic environmental disasters like the draining of the Aral Sea for cotton irrigation. And we're talking about tragedies like the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh, where over 1,000 garment workers died making cotton clothing.
But the good news is the fight against King Cotton also gives us a blueprint for how we can dismantle these kinds of systems today. It shows that it takes a powerful combination of things: moral clarity, just refusing to accept the economic excuses. You need real political will to pass laws, mass organization of people demanding change, strong enforcement with real penalties, and ultimately the courage to completely restructure our economies to be more just.
And for anyone who still wants to argue about the motives behind the Civil War, well, here's the receipt. This is from Mississippi's own Declaration of Secession. They say it right there, in black and white. Their cause was completely identified with the institution of slavery, which they themselves called the greatest material interest of the world.
So the ultimate lesson here is this: putting off a moral reckoning because it's economically inconvenient doesn't make the cost go away. It just multiplies it. By 1860, slavery was so deeply embedded in the American economy that the only way to get rid of it was through the deadliest war in the nation's history.
Which of course brings us to a final, tough question for all of us to think about. When we look at our world today, what are the systems of exploitation or extraction that feel so fundamental, so baked into our economy, that they just seem too big to change?